The artists within this exhibition, Kanien'kehá, who unfortunately is not with us today, Ifeoma Anyaeji, Maliciouz, Cécilia Bracmort, Levine, Shanna Strauss, and Calixte all assert different notions of community, belonging, and resistance. Collectively, these experiences and stories question the ways in which we share, imagine, and make space. While no one was looking suggests that cultural memory is a contested and living process archived in the personal stories of people who have felt the effect of histories of power and opposition in racially marginalized communities, Indigenous communities, and LGBTQ+ communities across Montreal. So, we're going to begin our discussion. I was hoping that we could hear about each artist. We're going to start with Cécilia, in general, talking about their piece in the exhibition and how it relates to notions of land, belonging, visibility, or invisibility in their work. So, go ahead.
Okay. Recently, probably with those pieces, I really try to think about the notion of visibility in the space, like here in Montreal, as I am an immigrant, a French immigrant, and coming here and so to be a black woman to here. So this kind of two vision, I wanted to really think about that in my situation here in Montreal, in Canada, because as I'm here, I'm accepted through the immigration of Canada in Quebec. So I was really focusing on the idea in these pieces with the different places related to the Montreal history, as we are celebrating the birthday of Montreal. Here is like WNOWL is a hero of Montreal, but when I learned about the story of this guy, I was really angry about it, because actually when you learn about this story, it was like actually more a thief. He stole the fur of Iroquois people to make money about it. So I was like, how are you celebrating a thief and making a hero? So there was a kind of big trouble I had on that. So I think it's like really that's kind of the thing. So I try to look after other places related to this kind of narrative, I mean. So that's why I use those places. And I think in the future, I would like to carry on in different places in Montreal to really use that.
The project is about featuring Black women in Montreal who are working towards positive change. And as it stands right now, it's comprised of 6 pieces. Right now, here we have 5, but it's comprised of 6 pieces. But the vision really is to have an ongoing project, which we feature women in different communities, Black communities, doing important work.
Voilà, alors je vais aller en français. Moi, à travers votre collaboration s'est faite très très naturellement. Puis à travers, je vous parlais un petit peu de la partie des photographies. En fait, moi, ce que j'ai demandé à ces femmes-là, dans les portraits, c'est de me montrer avec leurs mains comment ils réussissaient à trouver leur balance entre leurs actions activistes puis leur intégration au Québec. Alors, chaque femme était libre vraiment de s'exprimer à travers leurs mains. Puis chaque femme, je pense, nous amène dans des univers différents un peu, à travers leur passé, leur perception, leurs émotions. Moi, ma démarche artistique se centre sur l'équilibre. Alors, j'explore l'équilibre émotionnel, physique, spirituel et psychologique. Et puis, ce qui me passionne dans mon travail, c'est de savoir à quel point notre bien-être personnel en tant qu'individu affecte nos relations interpersonnelles avec les autres. En Occident. Alors, c'est un projet qui me touche personnellement, étant de communauté noire, moi francophone, Shanna anglophone. On a divisé un petit peu, on s'est questionné pour ce corpus d'œuvres, quelle femme de notre entourage nous inspirait. Alors, chacun de nous a choisi 3 femmes. Moi, bon, étant d'un réseau plus francophone, j'ai choisi 3 francophones. Shanna est allée avec sa sélection. Mais à travers, je pense un petit peu, vu que c'est un début de projet, je pense qu'on a pu explorer, on a pu connaître notre entourage, connaître ces femmes-là, on les a appris à les découvrir.
Often in kind of the circles that we were in, there was this notion of a lack of leadership within the Black community to kind of bring about change. And we were saying that actually that there's a lot of work being done by many different people to create change within our communities. And this is about really honoring those folks who are often not seen. So it really is about making visible work that is often invisible. So if you had any questions, please feel free to ask us.
We can move on to JJ as well and carry on the conversation. JJ's piece is actually in the back, so lead the way. Come along.
I guess for me, the most important thing about this piece is to talk about like alternative definitions of family, and I'm using like a very nostalgic medium, and a medium that is really often associated with like a like white middle class heteronormative kind of context. It's like Super 8, which is like the kind of consumer medium of the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, and by placing queer and trans bodies in images that we so often associate with like a heteronormative family structure, I'm trying to destabilize that. And these are all people that I photographed many, many times and who appear like throughout many different projects that I've done. And so I think, yeah, that definitely like visibility and invisibility comes up, but as well as belonging, because the idea that that family is this like very specific definition that excludes queer people or trans people definitely comes up. But not only that, many people in this film are 2 people are pregnant, and so it was made at a moment when our definition of queer family was about to expand to include children. So it felt like this kind of turning point, and I wanted to make some kind of document of that and like acknowledge this moment where our chosen family or our community was about to include children. And so that, yeah, that element of nostalgia kind of comes back in through that narrative.
Thank you. We can move here.
Essentially, my work would be defined as being part of the style known as upcycling, or what we wrongly used to refer to as recycling, which upcycling means the idea of repurposing something to give it a higher value. But I've recently come to understand that that's not the term that I want to associate myself with, and I'll tell you why. I repurpose these bags using a traditional Nigerian hair braiding technique, which is where I'm from, called threading. And because I thought about, my understanding of upcycling is that it has to do with the physical object, and I always used to think, what about the non-object? Things like processes and practices. Because threading is a receding traditional hair braiding technique, and I felt if, I could kill 2 birds with 1 stone. I could be, talking about reusing and extending value, because that's essentially what my work is about, the idea of extending value, giving meaning beyond, the factory assignments. We're told by the consumerist capitalist society to think and recognize objects, in a very linear way, just because, for selfish reasons. It's more money for the capitalist to, if you see your jeans as jeans and nothing more. And I'm thinking, an object has more meaning. It has to go beyond. We have to, flex the muscle of the object. And so when I make objects that, or I make forms that reference domestic space, architectural structures, the body, reiterations of experiences, just so that it's more of a curious activity for me, because I started off as a painter, and I was not satisfied with the very academic way of learning, and I felt that there has to be more to art, and that's what actually brought me to sculpture, which has always been my area of interest. So I was looking at myself as how I would define my identity, as being a Black woman and also being female and then being an artist, and what, that cultural definition that people would want to expect me to project the most. And I realized that, well, in as much as I'm very proud of where I'm from, it's always something I always like to show. There's always that colonial element that creeps in, because I'm from a British colony. And, the colonial disorientation, which is how I like to put it, that took place, left a lot of residue in, our language, our dressing, our general appearance. And my mother had a very strong leftover from the British interference, because she experienced it more than I did. The Queen was and is still her reference for a very well-dressed woman. So my mom, I remember as a kid, would tell you, your dress should not go beyond your knee. It has to look like this. You have to look really, very queen-like. And she would thread her hair by herself in front of a mirror. Usually it's done by someone. So they do, because threading is a very elaborate, really intricate, beautiful hair architecture. You have to look at images to see it. And so people would make all sorts of designs on it, but my mom would do it herself. And so you know what happens when you're trying to thread yourself in front of a mirror? It ends up looking like a spider web. And so her hair always had this similar look, but then she would, dress in a very nice English/Nigerian outfit and have these very psychedelic shoes, almost kind of portraying the crown of the queen, and and then the outfit, and it was hilarious to me. I'm like, why don't you just choose one thing to be? Either you dress all English or you dress all Nigerian. What's this thing in between? And I later realized, as I was going through the experiences, especially here, that I kind of had this reflective moment when I realized, wait, that's actually how I now dress. Taking these interferences and how we unconsciously, because of what society expects from us, start to adopt those individual things that eventually define who we are, eventually becomes our identity.
Moi, je représentais cette œuvre-là parce que c'est quand je vois des jeunes hommes avec ce profil-là, comme mon petit frère, non, c'est ça que je vois. Sauf qu'eux-mêmes, j'ai pas l'impression que c'est toujours ça qu'ils voient. C'est pour ça que j'ai mis la couronne sur les yeux, comme pour l'aveuglement. Puis, quand le sentiment extérieur et la non-reconnaissance de leur valeur peut prendre le dessus. Puis, personnellement, je pense que ce genre de provocation-là, c'est vraiment fait pour garder les gens dans un niveau vraiment bas d'estime de soi. Pour moi, les hommes noirs sont des kings, je représente comme ça. Puis, celle-là, le titre, c'est Mère. C'est une divinité égyptienne dont sa spécificité, c'est de maintenir un équilibre. Celle-là, j'avais faite dans le contexte d'une exposition au Musée des Beaux-Arts, où est-ce que j'ai eu à créer une œuvre en conversation avec la collection permanente canadienne. Puis les deux œuvres dont je me suis inspirée sont une œuvre représentant la Vierge Marie et une autre qui était une sculpture qui s'intitule Femmes de Kanien'kehá, qui était plusieurs femmes qu'on voit qui sont penchées avec des vêtements avec un tissu qui couvre leur tête puis qui font un long chemin. Puis ça m'a vraiment interpellée parce que je vois que c'est un peu la situation des Autochtones ici, qu'ils ont toujours un parcours à faire et qu'ils ne peuvent pas juste s'asseoir et abandonner. Puis quand il y a des femmes immigrantes qui viennent ici et qui grandissent avec leurs enfants, je vois qu'il y a une similitude dans le fait de partir de loin et de devoir prendre la responsabilité d'être en charge. Donc pour moi, je faisais un parallèle avec ce qu'il y a autour de moi en espérant des femmes comme ma mère ou d'autres de ma communauté. Donc pour cela, je représentais des enfants à côté, un qui tient un ananas puis un autre qui tient une poule, qui sont des symboles de prospérité. Puis on les voit un peu moins bien, mais en haut avec un aigle, puis un vautour qui se dispute comme une couronne qui est sur la tête
de la femme. Mais j'ai fait aussi un head wrap parce que je trouve que pour moi c'est un symbole royal, beaucoup plus qu'une couronne de métal qui est plus un symbole colonial. Donc on l'utilise, sauf que je trouve que ça n'a pas... en tout cas, c'est pas nécessaire. Puis en arrière, il y a une forme d'ombre, c'est un homme. Puis ça, j'ai plus grandi entouré de femmes, mais il y a toujours comme un homme dans le background qui est là, qui protège.
So I thought that for the next part of the conversation, we could think more specifically to the actual anniversary, the 375th. So one of the things that the exhibition underlines is this notion of countering national and mainstream narratives and making space for alternative and collective memories. And deconstructing the notion that there is one correct history or that history can even be objective. And as we know, history is written by people who are in power and who have the platform to project these notions, these narratives, and to ignore or erase other ones. And so we find ourselves in a situation where the narratives that are being heard and are being seen place those of us who are BIPOC, those of us who are not white, cis, straight, male, etc., at the margins and forever in the shadows. So what the exhibition seeks to accomplish then is to show the ways in which art can serve as almost a megaphone for those marginalized stories. And so I was hoping that the artists in the room could speak to this power of art and how they are able to bring forward narratives that are not in the mainstream.
By this kind of what I'm doing is like, okay, there's people like me, like, and people can maybe relate to that. People like does not find themselves visible too. So I think that could be a first thing, as simply as that.
In this project specifically, found wood, which has been used before for buildings and so on, which is really kind of represents Montreal, the city. We kind of reclaim that wood and putting the photographs of Black women whose stories and whose lives are often not seen in the public eye. It's like imprinting their image onto the city itself in a way. And so through that process, it's like a reclamation, so to speak, or a way to make visible by that imprint onto the city. And then in addition to that, being very mindful in our collaboration is also something that is really important in that, you know, Black folks, we know this in terms of art history and so on, are often not, they don't get to self-represent themselves. And so by ensuring as much as possible, being respectful of how the representation of the women that we're portraying, being very mindful of that is really important. So in terms of the photography piece, maybe Kevin can talk a little bit about that, but in photographing the women, there's like an array of photographs that he takes and then includes them in the selection process of the photographs. And then when I come in and start to make the mixed media part of it, being very selective in terms of the symbols that are used, in terms of how women are represented. It's a conversation that we have so that their representation is very much involved, how they self-represent or how they self-identify and how they choose to be represented is very, very much present in the pieces that we create. Sorry, I don't, maybe you wanted to add to that.
She say everything. Non, mais je parlais de moi, parce que moi c'est drôle parce que c'est, quand je regarde, moi je travaille en série, en fait, c'est des séries photos que je fais. Puis comme je dis, mon terme, ma démarche, elle est assez générale. Hein. Je parle d'équilibre, mais je parle d'humain à la base. Je parle pas spécifiquement d'un groupe ou d'une communauté. Mais je pense que ce projet-là, par exemple, ou quelques autres projets que j'ai réalisés, c'est vraiment plus relié à ma personnalité, à mes valeurs. Je me dis pas, oh, aujourd'hui je vais travailler sur des femmes noires, demain je vais travailler sur une série que j'ai faite sur les yogis, parce que je parle d'équilibre. Mais je pense que ces femmes noires que l'on voit, cette série Changemaker, c'est quelque chose de naturel, c'est mes valeurs. Je veux dire, j'ai grandi à Montréal. Pour moi, Montréal, c'est une ville qui est diversifiée. Pour moi, Montréal, les femmes noires, oui, on n'en voit pas. C'est des sujets qu'il faut parler. Puis ce projet-là ne découle pas d'un plan. C'était pas écrit, c'est une conversation qu'on a eue, Shanna, moi et moi, qu'on a comme, que ce soit pour Changemaker, ou que ce soit dans la vie de tous les jours, autour d'une bière ou dans un parc en parlant, c'est des conversations qui se transforment en projet. C'est pas des projets qu'on veut faire pour souligner ça, c'est vraiment, ça fait partie de notre vie, puis de nos discours, de notre questionnement au jour le jour, puis nos questionnements par rapport au 75e. Je pense que ces œuvres-là, l'art en général, a pour but de toucher, puis de souligner, soulever des questionnements, susciter de l'intérêt, puis parler à travers différents médiums. Puis, je pense que c'est ça qu'on fait. En fait, Changemaker, c'est vraiment, on veut apporter un changement, puis je veux parler du mot positif là-dedans. Parce qu'on a choisi, pour moi, être activiste, c'est pas quelque chose de négatif, c'est des femmes positives. Fait que nous, notre meilleure forme que l'on fait, moi, en tout cas, je suis plus bon qu'en l'art qu'en communication. Fait que c'est notre force, en fait, de faire quelque chose d'artistique, puis de le mettre de l'avant, puis montrer tout ce qui se fait à Montréal, selon notre perspective, notre point de vue, puis voilà.
I have a little bit of traditional background in growing up in Nigeria, and community means accountability, being responsible for not only for yourself but those around you, irrespective of their biological relationship with you. And so when I look at my practice as it relates to this, I'm kind of like throwing the question as to how do we build a community and what forms this community for us. Like if I use Montreal, for example, with this whole 375 celebration, I'm a little bit kind of angry because I'm like asking the question, who are you celebrating? Because every time I come across, and this is how I always feel every time I come across an Indigenous person, I feel like every time I hear the term community, I'm always asking, who is part of this, composition that you're referring to as community? Because whether we like it or not, some people might get angry if I say this, but we're all immigrants here. I always say if you're not 100% local, and by local I mean if you're not an Indigenous person who belongs to this, who didn't come by voyage or by exploration or expedition or whatever, you are an immigrant, irrespective of how long your ancestors have stayed here. And so, if at all, the person who should be celebrating Montreal are the landowners, the Indigenous persons. And in forming a community, the truth is no community is ideal, but sadly community seems to have this element of exclusion. And so one part of my work that talks about, when we think about environmental, we're thinking about sustaining. And sustaining is a major hinge of building a community. You want to sustain something, some element of, your cultural reference. And when there is such a celebration in Montreal that excludes that part, at what point do you step back? Like when Cecile was explaining her work to me, I was kind of angry, and I'm like, and it's one common thing you find in the African continent, where the person who's actually creating chaos is the one who's being celebrated as being heroic. And so if I were to respond to how communities are established in Montreal, for example, I would say it's a little bit faulted, because it still does not recognize that community entails three major things: integration, accountability, and sustainability. So when you're not integrated not meaning excluding people irrespective of language barrier, color, gender, age group, or whatever. And then, of course, being accountable to these individual or cultural differences, as well as finding means to sustain it, then there is no community.
if you are studying history, if you're a historian, if you're an academic in that field, no matter where you come from, whether you're an immigrant like myself, or you're from Montreal, or you've come from a working class background or a very privileged background, you are still in a place of immense privilege being a part of the academic community, and it's a responsibility, I think, that a lot of young scholars that are just entering the field struggle with, because, you know, as well as being a historian, a lot of young scholars are also activists and trying to navigate those two places at the same time, and also trying to break barriers in the history community. You know, because part of the history community is you have supervisors, you have historians that have been around a lot longer than you, that tend to be, you know, cisgendered white men who come from privilege, and trying to break down that barrier and convince people of the worth of different types of history. And then you go into maybe a protest culture, and you are seen as the one with the most amount of privilege. And then you go back to the academics, and you're the one with the least amount of privilege because you're a young scholar, you're an untested scholar, you're perhaps looking into other histories that other people don't find valid. So I think that responsibility, I think, needs to be taken really seriously by young scholars, and like engaging with different types of communities and communities that you're not a part of, let's say, and reaching out to those communities, because, you know, it's my responsibility as a historian to reach out to different people rather than waiting for people to reach out to me, which I think is really interesting. But it's such as far as, you know, looking at these celebrations of 375 years or however many years, as far as the Canadian colonial history, it's interesting because us as historians, we're part of that problem, because we perpetuate that problem when we write about places or people. We're part of that issue, and I think a lot of the times young historians feel as if they need to assimilate into that culture of colonialism in order to be taken seriously as a scholar, and just, it takes a lot of, not bravery, but it takes a lot of, it risks a lot to try and break down that barrier, and I think the more people that do it, and the more people that you're connected to, the communities, the more power you have to do it.
That issue of accountability and whose stories do we want to be holding up and making public and you know, raising the volume on, kind of plays into the everyday in a way that I think people sometimes forget. You know, it's not just about what you say when the cameras or the microphones are on, it's also about how you move through the world and how you move through society. Are you being sustainable in your day-to-day life? Are you being accountable to the people whose land you're on? So those are questions that I think really shine through in this exhibition as well. Did you want to?
Sure, yeah. I think that, I mean, yeah, the word community is so nebulous and used in so many different ways, and it's a word that I often use when talking about my work, and I'm like very aware of that, that kind of the way that it is used, like in anthropological contexts, you know, talking about like the gay community or different racialized communities, and I'm really interested in moving away from that way of talking about community, because I feel like it lumps people together who maybe share one kind of identity but no other kinds of identity, and the way that I use it is really like specific, and it's about not all queer people or all trans people or you know, all queer and trans people in Montreal, but really specifically about my friendships and my relationships, and this idea of living together or existing in such a way that, you know, as other people have mentioned, really like supporting one another, and like this idea of mutual aid and accountability in terms of actual relationships and not just identity, but also people who have chosen to to reject a mainstream identity or a mainstream identity that has rejected them. When I'm talking about my queer community, I'm not talking about any broader movement, but specifically people who have chosen to spend their lives together and be there for each other. And I think that it does go beyond just like a mainstream definition of friendship, because in my life and in a lot of different queer people's lives, those relationships are actually their primary relationships.
Comment est-ce qu'on peut utiliser l'art et nos pratiques en tant qu'individus pour montrer les histoires qui sont les plus vues, les plus reconnues, et comment on peut créer des espaces pour d'autres formes de rencontres?
C'est incarner ce sentiment de légitimité-là, d'appropriation. Pour moi, je fais à travers les arts murales, le graffiti. Je trouve que c'est ma façon où est-ce que je l'applique le plus, où est-ce que je rejoins le plus de gens. Puis c'est ça, tu sais, de créer des liens comme, tu sais, ils ont dit des points comme tellement pertinents, que je peux juste simplement les souligner. C'est en créant des liens, puis en étant conscient que une nation se bâtit à travers des parts des gens, puis de jamais oublier que les gens c'est nous. Puis même s'il y a un système qui est établi pour diriger les choses, puis qu'il y a probablement une narration comme de fond auquel on n'a pas tous accès pour la changer telle qu'elle, mais on est là, puis tous les moyens nécessaires sont pour s'approprier l'espace qui
One of the things that I think comes through a lot in your work is using what tools you have, right? S'approprier les trucs qu'on a pour faire passer un message. And I was hoping that you would be able to tell us more about that upcycling and your issue with that term. You mentioned it really quick at the beginning, and I was like, oh. So if you want, I would like to hear more about that.
The appropriation of material, and or rather the adaptation of material or found objects and stuff, has always been part of the practice of Nigerian art. So why would I want to, so this is me reflecting and saying, why would I still want to classify myself as an upcycling artist like it's a new thing? It's simply just going back to how art is being, which is the reason why I have a problem with this sudden definition of contemporary art, African art. And I'm like, if you really look at what is being projected as contemporary African art, it's art that has always existed. You just never noticed it or refused to acknowledge it. And now you're beginning to acknowledge it, of course, going back to the selfish need of, the capitalist society. So, I don't know if that answers it, but yeah, so that's one thing I know it's going to be a struggle, because academically they always want you to define what you're doing, and this is me just saying, I don't think I want to be boxed, classified, pushed into this defined confines of being an upcycled artist, which is the same thing as creating identities. I don't want this identity to be forced on me, because that's not necessarily who I am, because it limits me to only being, an artist that talks only about the environment and nothing, even though that's the basics of what it is, of the basis of my work. But it's essentially just traditional art form that has always existed, just only projected in, because in truth there is nothing contemporary in art. Everything is always going through a cycle, right?
Je reconnais tout ce qui s'est passé dans le passé, puis je suis capable de le reconnaître, de le transmettre par exemple à ma fille, puis pour qu'elle soit au courant de toute notre histoire. Mais au quotidien, franchement, j'essaie de montrer qu'on est tous égaux, excusez-moi, puis arrêter de cette barrière-là d'être. Je ne serai pas invisible, je me considère pas comme étant invisible. Ça, c'est ma perspective. Là. Moi, je ne suis pas invisible. Puis si quelqu'un veut me voir comme un invisible, ben, c'est ta perception. Mais moi, dans mon quotidien, je ne me sens pas oppressé maintenant. Je me sens plus, faisant plus partie de la masse. même si on essaie de me mettre, donc des fois j'ai comme l'impression que selon certains cadres, par exemple dans le cadre 75e, on le sait avec la publicité qu'on a vue, on pourrait se sentir dénigré, on pourrait se sentir mis de côté, mais puis on a raison de le dire et de le dénoncer, mais je me le sens pas de mon quotidien comme l'oppressé. Fait que déjà là, moi, avec cette attitude-là que j'ai, ça me permet de plus me sentir rejeté, plus me mettre à l'écart. Puis pour moi, Changemakers, c'est un projet d'artistique comme un autre, qui parle de femmes noires, mais qui parle d'un enjeu social comme un autre, puis comme en général comme l'art est supposé de faire, d'après moi, est supposé de questionner les sujets, puis de mettre, de forcer le public, puis l'observateur à aller à la rencontre de ces enjeux sociaux qui sont bien réels. Voilà.
Des fois dans la vie de tous les jours, des fois ou même dans des choses que je regarde, la façon dont je vais analyser les choses, ça va être vraiment par rapport à ce genre de problématique de visibilité. Là, j'ai regardé Mad Max, par exemple, avant de venir ici. Et je regardais les trucs futuristes, des fois je m'énerve toute seule en me disant mais je vois jamais un noir, je vois jamais une femme noire, mais pourquoi, c'est le genre de choses que je me mets après à réfléchir. Donc je suis encore en train d'essayer de passer au-delà de ce genre de problématique pour justement, je pense, faire mes choses. Je pense que c'est important d'arrêter des fois après de se focuser là-dessus aussi. Par exemple, quand on voit des histoires de Pepsi ou des histoires de la vidéo de Montréal, je pense qu'à un moment, il va falloir qu'on passe à travers et dire bon, c'est des bêtises, ok, et puis next, et puis on fait nos trucs, et puis that's it, et on va amplifier nos voix, et puis après, ils n'ont pas d'autre choix que de nous entendre. Mais là, pour l'instant, je suis encore un peu en peace of mode.
Well, if there are no other questions, I'm going to go ahead and thank you all so much for coming. And we have snacks if you would like to stick around, speak to the artists directly, and engage some more with the artwork. Also, the curators are here. We're happy to answer questions if you have them. And yeah, thank you very much.